No, everybody mute, get yourself muted. We don't want any laughing or anything like that.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
I have to, and every once in a while you do have to laugh.
Okay, Joanne, we're going to go live here. So why don't you mute yourself so we can.
Okay, I've got it.
Okay.
We're ready to go, Senator Feldman.
Okay, everybody. Welcome to the Senate Finance Committee. It's October 27th. We've got an important briefing today in the energy space. Let me just a couple things. Number one, Chair Kelly is in attendance for a while, but she's got a busy schedule this morning, so she may pop off here. So I'll run this particular meeting. We also have some guests from the House of Delegates today. We've got Delegate Brooks here in the House. We've got, I believe, Delegate Adams may be calling in. And I know at some point Delegate Charkoudian will, in fact, I see Delegate Charkoudian. I should say that I started this morning with Delegate Charkoudian. We toured a power plant here in my own Senate district in Dickerson. So we started there just this morning. And so we're all ready to talk energy policy, Delegate Charkoudian and myself. So with that said, the topic today is a briefing on the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, the SEIF fund. And the reason we thought this was important was last session, or actually last couple sessions, a lot of bills have come in the energy space that have used the SEIF fund as a funding source. And it presented a lot of conflicts, and there was, I think, a fair amount of confusion about what the purpose of the SEIF fund is, what's there, should we be prioritizing how that money is used, and a whole range of issues, I think, presented by the simple fact that we had multiple bills all using the same fund of money to as a funding source for the legislation. So we thought it would be important to have a briefing today on that very topic. And so with that, I think we're going to start with the Maryland Energy Administration. I know another person who was with me this morning on the same tour was the director of the Maryland Energy Administration, Mary Beth Tung, and it was good to see her this morning. And she is the director, and she brought with her today from the MEA, Eric Hoffman, the director of energy programs, as well as Wyatt Shiflett, the director of finance and administration. So we have a few panels, but I think it's best if we start with the MEA, the Maryland Energy Administration. So, so Director Tung, I don't know if do you have an order that you have prearranged, or do you want to lead off, or designate one of your other folks to lead off? You're unmuted, so you can tell us how you'd like to proceed from the MEA panel.
Thank you, Senator Feldman. It was great to see everyone today at the plant. You and Delegate Charkoudian and Delegate Chi was there, and a few other folks. It was great to see everybody, as well as the Montgomery County local delegation too. So that was really great. It was a good tour, and like you said, we're all keyed up for today's hearing. I'll start out, and then I'll pass it off to Eric and then to Wyatt, and we'll get to the brass tacks with Wyatt and all the numbers. But thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon to Chairman Kelly and to you also, Senator Feldman. And for the record, as you mentioned, my name is Mary Beth Tung, and I'm the director of the Maryland Energy Administration. I have a few other staff that's with me if there's questions. Our policy director, Dr. Ryan Opsahl, is with us. Richard Mallory, Intergovernmental Affairs, and Landon Farrig is, of course, all of you know him. He's the MEA's legislative liaison. In a moment, as I said, Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Shiflett are going to provide some details about MEA's programs and the status of our main funding source, the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, or lovingly known as the SEIF. But first, I wanted to share with you a couple of MEA's recent success stories to highlight how we continue to serve Maryland. And as we sort of chatted this morning informally, I just want to use this as an opportunity to let you know what the SEIF is used for. And thank you so much for that lead-in, because I couldn't have said it better myself. You did it was a good highlight. We were all losing sleep over that. Evidently, you folks were as well. So this is a good opportunity for us to let you know some of the projects and what we're using the SEIF for. On Thursday, September 9th, Standard Solar hosted MEA, as well as Senators Chris Van Hollen and Ben Cardin. So we've got our federal partners in there as well. for a tour of Maryland's newest community solar array. It was located in Union Bridge, Maryland. The Shepherd's Mill Community Solar Project has over 2.8 megawatts of solar capacity, producing enough power to power 315 Maryland homes. And at least 30% of the energy from the array will be provided to low and moderate income subscribers at a 30% savings. And this is something you're going to hear as we go through is our outreach to low and moderate income communities. This is something that we feel passionately about and have been doing for years. And it's one area that we just can't get to as much as we'd like to. And we really would like to be able to reach into that community a lot more than we have been able to. And you'll hear more about that as we go on. MEA supported this project with $440,000 grant to help Maryland residents that are disproportionately affected by the cost of energy. And with the rising cost of energy, we're going to unfortunately see a lot more of that this year. So hopefully we can help out some in that arena. On July 15th, 2021, Howard County government officials broke ground for a large public sector power purchase agreement, or PPA. Under a typical PPA, a solar development funds the construction of a solar array with an agreement to sell all of the energy generated to a buyer at an agreed upon price. This provides price stability and savings over the life of the contract, and quite frankly, allows the developer to go ahead and put the investment in to build a project, which is what we all want. The Howard County development includes 11 distinct projects sited on both public and private land and buildings. And I was at that dedication. We also had our federal, local, and state partners there as well. The solar arrays will produce electricity that equals more than 50% of the county's electricity usage. And MEA provided about $1 million of funding support for 6 of the 11 projects, and includes solar arrays at the Howard County Courthouse, the Detention Center in Jessup, the East Columbia Library, the Gateway Building in Columbia, the Skaggsville Public Safety Complex, and the East Columbia Library and the Gateway Building. So those of you familiar with Howard County, that was a huge project. There are so many more, but in the interest of time, I will wrap up by highlighting the Brookfield Bus Depot. We're really excited about this one. This is truly one of the great projects that demonstrate how MEA is leading the way in clean energy innovation. MEA provided the county with a $300,000 grant from its public facility solar grant program to help fund the nearly 1.7 megawatts of solar canopies that will be constructed over the bus parking areas. I have a personal fondness for solar canopies because you get covered parking. They're very visible. The public can see it. They can clamor for more, which is a good thing. And you're generating power. So it's a win-win-win. I love them. And it's a good way to use land in a urban, suburban setting without going into greenfield production, which is what we had talked about before, is greenfield versus brownfield development. Together, solar, natural gas, fuel generation in this project, battery storage, and electric vehicle charging equipment will create 5.6 megawatt microgrid. And this is what's so exciting about this project, that will power a fleet of 44 buses, assisting in the transition from diesel to electric. So we've got it all here. We've got electric buses, we have solar, we have storage. It's great. The microgrid's innovation lies in its flexibility, and this particular microgrid will be able to provide two-way grid services, allowing electricity to flow both into and out of the microgrid based upon the energy needs of the bus depot and surrounding grid. I implore the committee to listen to MEA's story today, and I'm pretty sure you will. How we administer the CEF responsibly to ensure continuity of programs, how we use it to spur private investment, grow businesses, and assist Maryland's most vulnerable. And I also ask the committee to assist us in the upcoming legislative session to protect this resource for its intended purpose. If there are no immediate questions, I would like to shift the micro to the macro by inviting MEA's Division of Director of Programs, Eric Kaufman, to begin his presentation. And I think those of you from Montgomery County would know Eric from his Montgomery County days. We poached him from Montgomery County, and as I was talking with some of the folks in the General Services Division today at the plant, he has allowed MEA and the state to work with Montgomery County a whole lot closer than we were able to before, even with him in Montgomery County, because he knows our program and he's able to work with Montgomery County, which really is a huge innovator in many of these areas. So it's great to have that partnership, a better partnership than we even had before. So if there's no immediate questions, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair.
So Director Tung, well, thank you for your comments. let's, as we've done in the past, let's wait until the MEA panel has kind of finished their testimony, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So that said, Mr. Kaufman, formerly from Montgomery County, former Montgomery County employee, you're up next. Eric.
Thank you. And for the record, my name's Eric Kaufman, Director of Energy Programs with the Maryland Energy Administration. Good afternoon, Senators, and thank you for this opportunity to tell you a little bit about MEA's programs. So in the big picture, MEA delivers a portfolio of programs derived from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. And the portfolio is carefully designed to provide an array of programs to address clean energy, affordability, reliability, and continuity from year to year. Those programs is essential to helping keep those priorities moving. We have a careful eye towards transforming the market. What we incentivize today hopefully won't need as much incentive tomorrow as markets develop and clean energy economy grows. Go to the next slide, please. So we have a portfolio of over 20 programs. They're assembled into 4 core portfolios: clean energy and resiliency, energy efficiency and fuels, partnerships and transportation, offshore wind. This portfolio is responsive to many of the biggest energy challenges of our day, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helping to improve equity in energy and clean energy economy, inclusivity, and then growing a clean energy workforce with an eye towards recovery in the wake of COVID. The portfolio as a whole offers opportunities for almost everyone, whether residential, commercial, government, low income, or communities with economic challenges to participate. And while the number of awards per program varies year to year, however, the general trend is towards program growth. For example, we've seen a dramatic increase in requests for electric vehicle charging rebates under the Electric Vehicle Supply and Equipment Program. Our requests under many of our programs continue to grow, and we're also seeing much more complicated programs in a good way, in that they're doing multiple things, which requires additional monitoring of performance. Innovation and partnership are core to our efforts, as I will discuss briefly over several example programs. But we aim to foster new approaches to common challenges and problems. So a few highlights, and the details of everything we do are published in the Strategic Energy Investment Fund report that's done annually. So next slide, please. So as Dr. Tung mentioned, low to moderate income energy efficiency is a priority for us. It's one of our longest standing programs. It's one of our most successful programs. So in fiscal year 21, we had 26 awards to community and local government agencies. And the program as a whole has fostered over $41 million in investment, resulting in anticipated 9,600 homes retrofitted and buildings. There are a few commercial buildings coming to that there. So community assets or multifamily. So that program is out there to help build hyperlocal community capacity with those nonprofits and governments that know their programs and their communities best. The program is historically oversubscribed year after year. Our requests exceed our resources, but we are always working to get the best out there. And we do distribute the funds by formula across the state so that there is geographic equity as well. New this year, we're very excited, is a pilot to add renewable energy to the mix, particularly solar for low-income single-family homes. The aim of this program is to further lower overall energy costs while expanding access to the clean energy economy. We're receiving a substantial interest in this program, and it really will help further reduce the costs of energy as part of the budget of those who can least afford it, and it's more important than ever. As Dr. Tung mentioned, community solar is a priority for us as well, and we're experiencing just complete and unprecedented demand for the program. But community solar allows those who may be in a rental or condominium or may have a home that is not appropriate for solar by its location or shading to participate in the clean energy economy. And what MEA does is we provide funding to buy down those costs so that the cost of the ultimate low to moderate income subscriber is less than they would pay for energy via other sources. And it's a particularly great way to ensure that their costs are lower, but they get access to the clean energy economy. And we've got a number of great projects that have broke ground and being completed across state, and many, many more applications for fiscal year 22. Next slide. Another program we're extremely passionate about is Resilient Maryland Resiliency Hubs. This is a pair of programs, and it's basically a 360-degree approach to resiliency. Our Resilient Maryland program provides feasibility and planning funds on a competitive basis to help critical infrastructure to low to moderate income community, businesses, and others who depend on highly reliable power or vulnerable to disruption. So we provide those feasibility funds. We awarded over 20 over the last 2 years. And we have some very notable projects, including a grant to both Frostburg University as well as Frostburg City, looking at the campus as well as some of the critical infrastructure in the community. And the Fairmont Heights project, and this one is really, really, really exceptional in that we provided an award for the development of a new build. The development is being orchestrated by the Housing Initiative Partnership for homes to be affordable housing to be marketed to low and moderate income Marylanders. And so these 6 houses are going to be very, very efficient that they were building out in Fairmont Heights, Prince George's County. But it wanted to incorporate solar, it wanted to incorporate storage, it wanted to incorporate resiliency so that during a prolonged power outage, those homes would have power. They received a Resilient Maryland feasibility grant and then subsequently applied for an innovation grant from us, where we were able to provide funding to assist, along with contributions from others involved in the project, in actually moving that project towards design and build. So we're very excited to see that one moving forward. And the portion that MEA is funding is the batteries and the energy storage. The Resiliency Hub program provides capital. So it'll often come through Resilient Maryland to get through feasibility, and then we'll provide capital to help get the project done. And we were pleased to see a Resiliency Hub at St. Jude's Shrine in Montgomery County come online this year that will help provide services in the case of a utility grid outage to that community by giving them access to things like charging of cell phones, communications, charging of medical equipment. And we have 3 additional resiliency hubs we've awarded in Baltimore City, who also received a Resilient Maryland program grant to look at a network of hubs, up to 30 across the city, that will help as well in that community. And that's just another example of us helping to foster comprehensive planning and then execution, sort of steel in the ground and getting projects done. Clean fuels and transportation. As Dr. Tung mentioned, this is we've got a lot of things where clean fuels and transportation intersect with other areas, such as the Montgomery County Smart Energy Depot project, which includes solar and electric vehicles. We'll contribute to the solar piece of that, but we also provide grant fundings to help offset some of the premium costs of alternative fuel heavy duty and medium duty vehicles. This helps bolster the state's commitment to the medium and heavy duty zero emission electric vehicle MOU that Governor Hogan signed recently. It provides funding to primarily transition fleets to alternative fuels. And we see substantial interest. We provide a grant to Montgomery County, to Highland Electric, who's providing services to Montgomery County Public Schools for the start of their efforts to electrify their school bus fleet. And then we also provide direct technical assistance. So we're working with Baltimore City, Cumberland, Laurel, and Rockville, and to look at their fleets. We give them access to a contractor under contract to MEA. They're able to look at their fleets and say, okay, what's the best way to integrate alternative and fuels and zero emission vehicles? And then through our Maryland Smart Energy Communities program, which also provides resources for efficiency and renewable energy, is one of our cornerstone programs that allows us to connect and create partnerships to local government level. We have 80 participating local governments, and we have provided a number of grants in the transportation sector as well as others. And some of the, could I get next slide, please? I apologize, I got a little ahead of myself. But we provide grants to those local governments to help implement projects, and we have ongoing and consistent demand for transportation projects. In front of you are a electric police vehicle that the city of Frostburg purchased in part using funds from the Maryland Smart Energy Communities Program. Our partners in Hyattsville also have a similar vehicle, and so continuing what we often find is we'll get 1 or 2 vehicles in the fleet and then they'll want more. So Hyattsville in particular is actually purchased an electric refuse and recycling truck. So it continues once they start getting these into their portfolio. And then a Frederick City electric bus. Next slide. So we're also very involved in offshore wind. This is a tremendous opportunity to grow jobs. We're looking at over $100 billion global offshore wind industry over the next 10 years. Incredible opportunity for economic development. The governor signed the Smart Power, the Southeastern Mid-Atlantic Regional Transformative Partnership for Offshore Wind Energy with North Carolina and Virginia to leverage our collective strengths. We offer grants for businesses to upgrade capital so that they can be ready to supply into the offshore wind industry. Most of those are dual use that will also be applicable to other industries as well. And we also help provide grants to train the workforce. And then we're also providing funds in partnership with our colleagues at the Department of Natural Resources, and in this case, University of Maryland Eastern Shore. The image in front of you is actually a buoy that was recently deployed. It is conducting active research. You can get the results on the web of marine mammal migratory routes. It's listening for those marine mammals as they move up and down the shore. So we have more information on their movements that can help with the offshore wind industry design responsibly, as well as other maritime industries. And with that, that's a quick summary of some of our highlight programs. And when the time comes, I am available for questions, and I thank the committee for their time.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Kaufman. I have listed Mr. Shiflett. Wyatt, are you here? And just to clarify, Richard Mallory from, I guess, MEA's got it here is attending as well. I don't know if he was planning to speak, but Wyatt, I do see you've popped up. So I think you're going to be next up. I'm not sure if Mr. Mallory has a speaking role, but Wyatt, why don't you go? And then if not, then we'll open it up to questions from the committee. So Mr. Shiflett, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for your introduction. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the SEEF holistically and make sure that as spending initiatives are put forward, that everyone is on a common understanding of the fund balance and some of the budget mechanisms. So Vice Chair, thank you very much for your introduction and the opportunity to gather today. I'm going to talk about a few things. First, an overview of SEEF funding sources. An overview of the revenue that funds what we call the SEEF, MEA's role as an administrator, a brief overview at RGGI. We'll spend the least amount of time there because I think most of us are familiar with RGGI. You can circle back if needed. And lastly, we'll touch on the SEEF fund balances and the appropriated use of funds in fiscal year 22. So that's a brief overview, and I promise to move it quickly. Next slide. Great. As you can see here, there's 3 primary funding sources for the SEEF. The RGGI auctions, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, is the primary funding source, and we'll see that. But that hasn't always been the case in the past. I think the DLS analysis last year of our budget was spot on when it showed several times throughout the analysis that the revenue sources outside of RGGI have diminished and fund balances are depleted. And things outside of RGGI. So this overview will highlight that, but it's stuff that the General Assembly has seen before in budget analysis for fiscal year 22. There are RPS and ACP payments. It hasn't been significant to date, and we can touch on that if we need to about forecasting of ACP. It's difficult to do, but the next slide will highlight what we've collected to date. And there's also the Public Service Commission orders. We're familiar with some of the mergers, Exelon Constellation, Pepco settlements. So the PSC orders and the deposits into the SEEF largely were from those settlements, but those funds have been appropriated and allocated for projects. And there is no more revenue associated with projections or the last 2 fiscal years from settlements and PSC orders. Next slide, please. This slide attempts to quantify some of what I just spoke about. There is an asterisk next to the RGGI appropriation. I think it's important for people to understand from a budgeting purpose and the budget that we submit and the budget mechanism for revenues that DBM has approved over the years has been to use a floor price and then pull in excess from prior fiscal years when there's an overattainment from the floor price. And it actually looks back 2 fiscal years for that overattainment. MEA is constantly talking to DBM about possible improvements to the budget mechanism, but I feel like at times people can get tripped up because they see the auctions, the current auctions, the current price, but there's been a budget commitment not to build a budget on future auction revenue and the expectation or a projection of future auction revenue, but to live within our existing balance. And that's an important mindset to understand. It's like, a personal finance, right? You're paying your mortgage from your savings. You're not counting on your projected earnings to pay your mortgage because what if your projected earnings are cut? So that's a mechanism that's been in place for a few years. I've been at MEA for 11 months. So a lot of people have more history with that mechanism than I do, but I just don't want us to get tripped up with how revenues are appropriated and budgeted for versus live auction prices. And we'll see a chart of auction history going forward. You also see that there are no what we call settlement or PSC order funding last year or this fiscal year. Interest fund is down. Just interest rates are down. We expect a slight uptick in interest from funds held in fiscal year 22, but it's not a significant funding source. And the collection of ACP revenue that's associated with the renewal portfolio standard has been approximately $100,000. Doesn't really move the needle when we get to the budget for appropriated uses for CEF funds. Next slide, please. Just a brief overview. CEF statute directs the allocation of revenue. We'll see that in the next slide. Into various sub-accounts, MEA as the administrator of the CEF does that with great diligence. And that's formulaic and that's based on legislation. MDE provides a lot of oversight with RGGI. MDE's executive director is on the board. When it comes to forecasting allowances and all the compliance issues, MDE is really at the forefront. But MEA actually is the administrator of the CEF. And there have been some audit recommendations over the past about interagency involvement and getting MOUs and really documenting the interagency fund transfers from the CEF. It's all to the good of CEF accounting and administering, but that's a relatively new initiative in the last few years. Most of MEA's programs or all of MEA's programs have to follow the encumbrance rules and the appropriation. But MEA does monitor how other agencies that are appropriated CEF funds encumber and keeps a track of those encumbrances and actual spends, and the actual spends obviously impact the cash balance. But the appropriation and the encumbrance of the full appropriation impact funds available. And there's a difference between a cash balance and funds available. MEA does monitor available funds, not just the cash balance. Next slide, please. This is the allocation of revenue I alluded to, nothing new here. 50% goes to bill pay assistance, and that goes through DHS. 10% goes to energy efficiency programs that benefit the LMI community. Another 10% goes to energy efficiency for all other programs. It can include LMI, but it could be outside of LMI. 20% goes to renewable energy, and up to 10% goes to the administration for MEA and to administer the CEF. That is capped at $5 million. That cap's getting tighter and tighter with the more MEA is asked to do, both in programmatic initiatives and also legislative. There's a lot of times where we're asked to lean into studies and provide staffing to support the overall administration of the CEF and to serve our sector. But there is a cap, currently a cap on administration, not to exceed 10 million of CEF proceeds. Next slide, please. This is the part I'll be very brief about. Most of us know about Reggie, but I thought the graphic was good to show the states that participate. Virginia came online in calendar year 21. Pennsylvania is anticipated to come online in calendar year 22. So there's been a renewed interest in Reggie, which is a good sign from our neighboring states. It's helped with the demand and the auctions. And Reggie certainly is credible for all the reasons that we know. Didn't want to hover on this slide too long, but just to show that who's participating. We know that the allowances and the market itself, fungible, bankable, tradable. There's a secondary market. There's speculation in the marketplace. The people that participate in the auctions is not just limited to people that have compliance obligations. These are some things that make the marketplace unique, but it truly is a cap and invest. And Maryland has a lot of discretion over how to invest the CEF proceeds, and that's all done through the General Assembly. Next slide, please. A lot of what I just said, I think we bipartisan. I'm certainly here to talk about the numbers and not get too much into that, but there is a buy-in from Reggie. And there is a lot of precedent in history. I will talk about the price mechanics in the future. Reggie has done a good job of providing some stability in the marketplace that does encourage new entrants. So I will touch on that. That's more financial nature. But I think Reggie's here to stay. And Maryland certainly has benefited from the proceeds that we received. Next slide, please. Just want to highlight a quarterly auction. The last quarterly auction was on September 8th. The next quarterly auction is December 1st. The last quarterly auction, there was approximately $2.8 million in allowances, and the clearing price was $9.30. So that's an approximate $26.5 million in proceeds from that specific auction. And that money does go to the CEF account for the cash balance. But it doesn't change deployment in 22. We all know the budget for 22 has been passed. So there's a separate and distinct process for appropriation and spending use. And then the auctions itself just fund the CEF account. I mentioned before the secondary market, but at times, there could be, 40–50% of the participants don't have a compliance obligation, which is interesting. Next slide, please. Okay. The way my screen shows, I can't really see the last few columns. I apologize for that. I could see everyone's faces, and that's more important. But I did want to hover here for a second. This might be one of the most important things I have to discuss today is the volatility in the Reggie market itself. And you can see the blue line, the light blue line that is sort of a shaded area, that speaks to gross proceeds from an auction per quarterly auction. It's the combination of the price, which is the dark blue graph, and then the red line, which is actual allowances that are sold. And on the right-hand side is the scale for the allowances that are sold. On the left-hand side of this chart is the cumulative amount of proceeds that are earned per auction. I do apologize. The very last auction fell off of this chart, but I did just speak to it. It was the last auction where the clearing price was $9.30. The allowances were $2.8 million, and gross proceeds were approximately $26.5 million. And I can recirculate this chart with that last auction on there. I do apologize for that slight administrative oversight. But the theme here is that auction prices are going up, and through fiscal year, halfway through fiscal year 16, all the way through to almost the end of fiscal year 22, we were in a ban of trading. I mean, you can see that around $15 or 15 million proceeds at the max, down to 7 million proceeds for a given auction at the low, but we were in a range and a band where the budget mechanism of budgeting at the floor and pulling in overattainment from 2 fiscal years really didn't build up a huge fund balance. because there wasn't a big difference in overattainment from 2 years ago or 1 year ago. The moving average was pretty smooth. Maybe not each auction, but an 8-quarter moving average is pretty smooth during that time period. We are not experiencing that now. MEA is well aware of that. Current pricing for the auction is $12.80 in the secondary market. That's up 38% from the last auction at $9.30. So we monitor this closely. A lot of this we believe has to do with increased demand and participation from Virginia and now Pennsylvania coming online. There's certainly a component of federal policy that plays into this. We discussed this with MEE. They're a little closer to the compliance part than we are as just the administrator of the SEIF. But I did want to bring that up, that we're aware and we're not blind to the current pricing. And I think the next slide will speak to some of the pricing mechanisms that might keep a band on pricing itself and some of the newly instituted price mechanics. So if we could get to the next slide, I'd appreciate it. So I alluded to us budgeting at the minimum reserve price. Currently, that's $2.44. Seems really disconnected from the last auction at $9.30. But that's the budget mechanism. Last year, there was a cost containment reserve implemented as well as an emission containment reserve, basically to moderate the price and put it in a band. The cost containment would allow additional sales to come on to if the cost was going to exceed $13, additional allocations of auctions would be allowed. It doesn't guarantee the price won't go over $13. And that's what I want to drive home. It's a trigger, and there's additional allowances that would be triggered and auctioned at that point, but it doesn't promise the price can't go over $13, but it does provide some stability. The emissions control is the reverse. If the price goes under $6, then they can withhold auction allowances, and that's to level set supply and demand and hopefully bring the price above $6. And once again, that's not guaranteed. The set amount of allowances that are triggered is known. It's a percentage. But I just want to share that I think this is bringing more people to the market, and it's a more organized market because of these price mechanics. Next slide, please. Okay, the fund balance, cash, you can see the cash on the right-hand side, $257 million in cash. That's from our year-end numbers. That's in our accounting statements and FEMIS. And then from there, we subtract encumbrances that are, once again, in FEMIS. Those have a lot to do with MEA. We have control over our own encumbrance process. We have a lot of visibility into that. And next, we move into commitments. This is outside of MEA. This is with other state agencies. I just want to caution everyone. This is what $41 million in commitments. That could grow. Our external reporting deadline from other agencies is November 1st. And that's when they have to provide evidence of an encumbrance in fiscal year 21. It wouldn't grow drastically, but we're giving you the best information we have at this time. But we rely on other agencies to supply timely information. And once again, some have provided it to us, but the due date for information on their encumbrances, a lot of times agencies are given an appropriation, but if they can't spend it or they know they don't have the program designed, it could be COVID related. It could have to do with labor or commerce or some of the CEJA initiatives. But if they didn't encumber the funds, then we won't put it here as a commitment. So if anything, this number is understated, and then the projected fund balance is slightly overstated. But I want to present numbers that we had in hand, and these are the commitments that we have in hand. So that gives us an available fund balance, approximately $153 million. We back out, or we add in revenue. We discuss how it's budgeted at the floor price. We have some suggestions in fiscal year 23, maybe to move away from the floor price since it's so far away from current market pricing. And the rest of this is the 22 appropriations per the state budget book. EV tax credit, this is taken right from the fiscal note. And it leaves us with a projected available fund balance. I do have here a placeholder for fiscal year 22 budget amendment. Anyone that's bringing in a budget amendment for SEIF funds, that's coming forward in the budget process now. MEA certainly has a budget amendment put forth for 22. I think it's just too premature to speak of that, but any budget amendments that are passed would further reduce the availability of funds here. I do want to share that our budget mechanism does call for a fund balance. The goal is not to take the fund balance to zero, because it'd be impossible to have continuity of programs the next fiscal year during a auction decline. And the previous slide did show multiple times in the recent history where revenue goes down. It doesn't always go up, and it's a complicated marketplace. So we want to prepare for that. We don't want to exhaust the fund balance and then find ourselves in a situation where revenues are declining, but we budgeted for higher revenues and we're counting on spending the money the exact same time it's coming in. It sends a bad signal to the market when we have to close programs or somehow prioritize when we budgeted 100 million in spending, but we only received 60 million in revenue. How do we deal with that in real time during a budget? We've always shied away from that historically in our budgeting approach. Next slide, please. This is just a brief look at the SEIF funds. It goes to different agencies. MEA certainly has a programmatic element to this, and Eric alluded to a lot of the programs that we run, but the funds do go to other places outside of MEA, and that's through the budget process. I think this is self-explanatory, but the appropriation speaks to all of the SEIF funding, and we alluded to some settlements. So if anyone's curious why it looks like DHS isn't getting 50%, they do get 50% of the RGGI auction proceeds, but not 50% of the big pot. And we've had PSC orders and other funding from previous years that's got spent in 20, 21, and 22, but not going forward because those other outside of RGGI fund sources will be exhausted. Next slide. Well, thank you for your time. I hope it was helpful. And Mary, I'm sure we're available for questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Shiflett. Let's go back to Director Tung. Do you have any closing comments before we open up the committee for some Q&A?
Very brief. Again, thanks for listening to us. I'm hoping everyone walks away with the idea that our programs are carefully planned. We address core issues, and quite frankly, MEA does a lot. Wrapped around this, which you all haven't seen, is our policy arm. And I know some of that was discussed this morning at the plant. Our interactions with PJM, with Public Service Commission studies that we've done on various subjects that either the General Assembly are interested in or we're interested in, as a state as a whole. So Dr. Opsahl is available for questions. He's in charge of that division. But we are doing a lot. Those positions are all funded with the SEIF as well. So I don't think there's a whole lot more to say. One thing I do want to point to is that one chart that Wyatt showed with lines zigzagging all over the place. I came in when the SEIF was at a high, and then it just plummeted within 6 months of me coming in. I don't know if that means anything about me coming on board or whatever. It was not a nice welcome from Reggie. But we're all sort of a little gun shy because of that. So we've been very conservative in how we budget. So I think Wyatt kind of went through a lot of that for you. So yeah, we're certainly available for any questions you folks may have at this point. So
okay,
thanks again for having us.
Thank you, Director. Any questions from any member of the Finance Committee or our guests from Economic Matters? I do see Delegate Charkoudian and Delegate Brooks. Did you also? We'll start with Delegate Charkoudian, and then we'll go to Delegate Brooks, and we'll see where we are.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, I guess. Madam Chair is not here anymore. And thanks for the presentation. I guess we're crashing the party and then hogging the questions. I have 2 technical questions and 2 others. One other sort of big picture question that you could start to answer. I guess my technical questions, I just want to understand ACP budget in there was 0.1 million. I'm wondering if there's a breakout of the ACPs and the SREC ACPs, and the new SREC ACPs, I think we're expecting would bring in more income sort of right about now, because we just increased the solar carve out, and then solar was sort of slower over the last couple of years. And I didn't know if so that's part of the question, if you can talk through that and what's expected. And then I'm just wondering if that's tied to the low income solar program that you identified as being new, if that's being funded by the SREC ACPs, which are required to go to low income solar. So if you can just kind of connect those pieces, and then I'll ask just one other question after that.
Thank you for those two questions. I'm going to take an initial stab here, and then I think the ACP question can probably be answered better by Wyatt, and then Eric Kaufman can handle the low income. In short, we still have not seen much of an increase in ACP. It's really low numbers right now. We haven't really seen much of an increase. I don't know how many auction units are still floating around out there, because I know last year we were like chewing through those that were still floating around. So we didn't really expect a lot last year. I don't know how much we're going to be expecting this year, and it's a market, so who knows. I haven't heard anything that we're going to be anticipating a lot coming in. We may see some increase. And to the low-income solar program, we're really not funding that right now, I don't think, unless Mr. Kaufman or somebody's going to correct me on that, on the ACP. That's coming straight from the CEF. So first, Wyatt, if you'd like to speak about the SREC prices and the ACP, and then Eric, if you need to add to that.
Sure. I don't have much to add. I think Eric probably does. But what you saw in the forecast was really just the predictable ACP that we've had year after year after year. It's not speaking to the new standard. I know that there's some projections for 23, but we didn't put any projections in our budget for 22 for increased ACP, and we haven't seen it to date. I know Eric's staff has done some modeling on 23. I know some numbers were talked about, a potential range, 10 million, great, but it's hard to put that in the budget, and nothing was put in the budget for 22.
Okay. Yeah,
So
I
Mr.
think.
Kaufman, I'm sorry. Does Eric have anything to add to
sorry.
that? Or?
No, I'd add to it
Okay.
apologies.
Sorry.
The
Go ahead, Eric.
the low income solar program is funded by the sort of the historic ACP that Division Director Shiflett mentioned, but it's also designed as a pilot to help us chart a course should and when those funds materialize. We've designed it to be scalable, so it can be scaled up or down based on the available funding.
Okay. I do think it should be possible with the SREC ACPs to have some predictability, because we know what our numbers need to be as a state, and we can see what interconnection requests look like, and so you can usually predict a year or so out what the gap might be. But we could talk about that math and predictions maybe another time. I think.
I'm sorry. Can I just interject for a second?
Yeah,
The
go
problem is that you have private entities out there that are holding on for whatever reason. I don't know why. They just don't think it's a good time to be letting their stuff go or whatever. So we don't know who's holding what out there. That's why it's kind of hard to predict at this point. I do think, as you mentioned, there is a little bit of a predictability of an upward swing based on interconnections and whatnot, but we just don't know what's floating around out there. We can only guess. That's the problem. And nobody else has those answers either. So
Yeah, and I would add if there's a way that
be
we
careful.
can
Don't talk over everybody here now. Okay, Wyatt, you get the last word, and then we'll go back to Delegate Charkoudian for her additional question. So Wyatt, why don't you go?
Thank you. I was just going to suggest, Delegate Charkoudian, I'd love to connect on this. If there's a way that we can project, and then maybe just be conservative, have a band, and maybe take the conservative, and hope for the best. But yeah, if we can model this and feel good about the projections, it should be included in budgets. It just hasn't been to date.
Okay.
And we haven't seen the revenue to date.
Okay, Delegate
That would
Charkoudian,
make
you're
sense because of the lag.
Okay, you've got that. Why don't you put out that additional question, then we'll go to Delegate Brooks and go on.
Thank you. My second question is sort of a bigger picture question that I'll just maybe ask you to speak to, and it's probably a longer conversation, but it has to do with kind of the larger decision-making, priorities, accountability, impact, how impact is measured, what the goals are over time. I'm not sure that I have a really clear understanding of that. I think if you look sort of at New Jersey, you can see their dashboard ties the outcomes of the RGGI investments to carbon emission decreases over time. So, and perhaps we can, or I'm not sure what the right way to do it is, but I don't have a really good sense of exactly how the decisions. I like a lot of the projects that you're doing. In fact, I'm taking one of them and putting it in statute. I think it's so good, the pilot project. So I'm not suggesting that some of what you're doing with the money isn't good. I'm just saying it's not clear how the decisions are made and how the decisions are made to invest in which pieces. And in particular, for example, for a few years in a row, some of the CEF money was used to do building efficiency upgrades to a state building, which would have been done out of state general funds. And the CEF report even said, well, this, one of the benefits of this is we saved in the general funds by using CEF funds. And that definitely seems to be an inappropriate use of CEF funds. But I think that sort of leaves us as I think that it seems like part of what you're saying to the General Assembly is like, stop writing CEF into all of these bills because there's this bigger picture and we're trying to, manage the pieces. And if you write into all the bills, then there won't be any money. But I think for us, it's a struggle to figure out what exactly that bigger picture is. Not just are there good programs, because clearly there are very good programs happening, but what is the bigger picture? What's the transparency? What's the accountability? I think that's the place that I'm still struggling a bit to understand. And if you want to speak to that a little bit now, and I'm sure we can have it as an ongoing conversation as well.
Certainly. Thank you for those questions. We always start, when we go to plan on where the dollars go, we start with the formula that was set forth by the legislature. So 50% comes off the top for low-income bill assistance. Then we have 20% for energy efficiency, 20% for renewable energy. And then the energy efficiency is split between low income and other energy efficiency. So that is our starting point. We can't deviate from those. Those are statutorily set. So that's where we start out. I would love to put a whole lot more money into low income energy efficiency because those folks need the money. It's either energy or your food bill, so they need the help. We have that formula and we have several goals we're trying to meet. A lot of times we report out in kilowatt hours saved or therm saved and that kind of thing. But that all translates into, of course, how many tons of carbon dioxide are we saving, by our programs. But we have multiple goals we have. One is looking at the low-income community. Those programs may not be as financially efficient as perhaps other programs that are non-low income, because low-income folks don't put money into their upgrades. Whereas if you're a commercial entity and you want to upgrade, you're putting, money into it and then we're helping you out. So we've got multiple things we're trying to do here. And it's not all about how much greenhouse gas emissions we've saved. It's looking at low income communities. It's looking at that formula and all those things that we're being asked to do right now from the CEF. So that's why it's a little harder to have a dashboard like New Jersey. That's not to say we're not, and we're constantly working on this to try to figure out how to get these metrics, not so much to regiment it, because then that makes it harder to be a little bit flexible when there's a need somewhere. But to, as you said, to make sure that the information gets out to those of you that are, in the legislature, but also to the public as to what we're doing and what goals we're trying to meet. So we do work with MDE and other agencies on these goals. Any suggestion, and you're right, Delegate Shakouti, and this is a longer conversation for another day, I think, but we're always open to any suggestions. We're constantly doing it internally, and also any suggestions any of you may have for how to make this a little bit more transparent. We are aware of the New Jersey dashboard. It's a great resource. And hopefully we can do something that will make it a little clearer for everyone.
Okay, with that, we're going to go to Delegate Brooks had a question before, and then we'll go to Senator Hayes, who's got his hand raised. So Delegate Brooks, you're up.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks Wyatt and Eric for the presentation. This first question is for Eric. Eric, the Solar for Low Income pilot, and that's being funded by ACP. Now, is that project allowing the low income folks to purchase panels and take advantage of the, because I know they extended the ITC, the investment tax credit, so they can take advantage of those actual tax credits from the federal government?
The way we've designed it is we want to build capacity with the organizations we work with on the low to moderate income energy efficiency program. We want to try and bring the efficiency and renewable energy together. So this first pilot is grants out to those community organizations that have either worked with us currently or historically worked with us but we're contemplating and working through options that include other models as well for folks who are not necessarily participating in those programs.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, thanks. The second question for Wyatt. The fund balance for June 30, 2021 showed a 257.7 mil. And then I saw the encumbrances for MEA and then the non-encumbrances. That took it down to 153.1. Then I saw what the appropriations for 2022 was 101 plus an addition, and EV tax credit was 10. So is there a correlation between the appropriations and then the anticipated revenue that's going to be coming in? Because that fund balance dropped probably, it looked like about 150%. So and you were talking about the fact that you don't want that to get down to zero. So.
Oh, you're muted. Wyatt, you're muted. You trying to talk? There you go.
Sorry, Senator Feldman. Yes, I don't know if there's a correlation, but there's clearly the appropriations are set in the budget. So when we get to the appropriations and the fiscal impact of that, and we're estimating the revenue. But the effect on the cash balance when we have auctions that are greater than our projection is an increase in the cash balance. I think we've seen that over the years. We've seen a buildup of the cash balance, but I mean, we have to go with what's in the budget book, and we have to cut off a certain point of our projection for revenues, and our methodology is based on the floor price. I mean, that's not the greatest answer, but it kind of shows up in a lag as we have auctions that are greater than our projection. And in our 23 budget and our working with DVM is we're expecting less of that. And I hope you guys will see that in the 23 budget, that you'll see less of a low floor price and a huge overattainment and some sort of balance of what we're projecting, more in line with the actual auctions and still conservative in nature.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Senator Hayes.
Thank you. I had to come off of mute there, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. I think it was Eric. I have tons and tons of questions about the low income programs that you have, but we don't have enough time here today. And so I definitely want to follow up to get a better understanding of those. But one of the last slides that was presented to us was the C funds usage, and it was on page 12, the next to the last page of the last presentation. And I was looking at the line as it relates to Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. And it showed, in actuals of 2020, it was 0.6 million. 2021, 2022, there was no appropriations for it. Trying to get an idea of when you all work with DHCD, what are these type of funds used for? And have we explored opportunities, especially because I know DHCD have so many housing projects, especially as it relates to affordable or low income housing around the state. Are there greater opportunities there to leverage some of the various programs that they have to make sure that individuals are getting the help they need? And they do a lot more rental than they do home ownership, but I'm also very much interested in opportunities for affordable home ownership. Can anyone speak to what you all have done with DHCD and other opportunities that may exist?
Senator Hayes, thank you very much for your question. I'm going to move this to Mary and Eric. I've been at the agency for 11 months, so I don't have the best historical perspective on that exact question. Eric, I think, may have more of a historical perspective on what we've done in the past. And it might be mutual. Some of our funds come with a lot of restrictions and requirements for eligibility of CEF use. So I don't want to allude to that as entirely the answer, but people don't always find it easiest to use the CEF funds. So Mary, do you want to share our history with DHCD? And we did fund something in 22, but nothing's been appropriated to DHC through the state budget process in the last 2 years.
Yeah, our relationship with DHCD has been, shall we say, complicated because they have their requirements, we have ours, and they don't necessarily overlap. And I agree with you, Senator Hayes, that it would be great if they overlapped more. We work with them more on a policy level for energy efficiency and so forth. But I think Eric might have a little bit more nuts and bolts on that. We did have a program per se when I first came to the agency with the HCD. And at some point, it was hard because of their federal requirements for them to use the CEF money and requirements we had. So I don't know, Eric, I know you've been having some discussions. I don't know if you had anything to add to that or not.
You're on mute, Eric.
Eric, you're on mute. I don't know if you're trying to answer. Eric, you there?
Apologies, I had a little bit of a technical difficulty with my
Okay.
desktop and had to go to Plan B, which is a
That's fine.
mobile device. But yeah, we work closely with DHCD. We've provided a number of had partnerships with them in the past. Our model works very, very well.
Are you able to describe any of those examples by which you guys have worked with DHCD?
Yeah, absolutely. Senator.
I'm happy to follow up if you don't have an answer here today.
Yeah, we have in the past. We have over the last, I think, about 3 years, we were in MOU with them to build a net zero housing complex. They have just completed that. That MOU may even go back further than that. But we're working with them to evaluate the results of that. And we meet with them periodically and we exchange best practices and we refer people between programs all the time.
And we also, I know, I'm sorry. One other is we have a program called Smart Energy Community Program. And a lot of times we'll do our part with that and they'll do their part. And so we work together on those programs where they're kind of doing their part of the urban renewal and then we'll come in and do the energy efficiency parts of what we can do on our end. So they have the more health and welfare stuff more so than we do. So that's where some of the disconnect is between their federal requirements and our requirements. So that's one program that's ongoing is the Smart Energy Communities, and there are projects we work with them. I know Cambridge is one.
I think if we just thought a little bit more creatively, there's definitely some opportunities there, but I'll definitely follow up.
I agree.
Because I don't want to take up too much time. But the other question I had, understanding that these aren't general funds, whether it be the CEF funds or the other grants that you all offer to communities, are there any requirements as it relates to minority participation similar to what there are in regular state procurement law?
As far as
asked another way, how do you account for equity as it relates to communities of color and so forth in the distribution of funds from your agency?
We look more on low and moderate income kind of metrics that we use, and we work with these community organizations, as Eric had mentioned, because they know the community better than we do. So the metrics would be through them. So we're not looking at communities of color so much as we're looking at communities of need. I think it's similar to how DHCD does it, but I don't want to speak for them. As far as our procurements, we have the same requirements as the state does for minority procurements and that kind of thing. And I believe we have it in our contracts that any contractor working on these grants would also have to fulfill some of that. It's kind of hard with the smaller companies, particularly solar installers and so forth, but we do work with quite a few companies, particularly in a small business, a lot of small businesses. So a lot of what I did in my law practice for coming here is working with small minority businesses, and a lot of those small businesses are minority businesses. So it is something we definitely want to do more of, though. So
As part of the follow-up to this briefing, can you guys provide to these committees what are the goals as it relates to the distribution of these funds, and where has the agency been in meeting these goals?
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Delegate Adams, you had your hand up and then it went down. Are you, if you do have a question, it'll be the last one for the MEA panel because we have a few other witnesses we want to get to. So Delegate Adams, did you have a question?
Well, I was going to ask Director a question. And so basically you had early on talked about green fields and brown fields. And, you know, I sort of cut down the line of if you're a private property owner on the Eastern Shore that owns 200 or 300 acres of land, you want to put solar in, you know, that you should be allowed to do that. By the same token, I think you were talking through the lens of how we could better utilize brownfields parking lots, for example. The only example I've seen, like in Salisbury, is Salisbury University has some, you know, solar over top parking. I'm curious, the question then is, how do you reach out to private property owners for the purpose of encouraging them perhaps to participate in programs, or do the programs even exist? I.e., as opposed to using, you know, valuable farmland, we could be using, you know, the brownfields, so to speak. So that was my question.
You kind of hit at the core of our dilemma, is the landowner rights versus, you know, state policy of wanting to do more brownfield, heavily developed areas, you know, former landfills and that kind of thing. As far as outreach, we have our standard versions of outreach that I think all the state agencies do. I've been frustrated with the fact that we're not getting to who we want to get to as efficiently as we'd like to. We just hired a new communications director. I'm hoping she's coming in with all kinds of great new ideas. I think she's listening in right now, Jemiah. And I think that with her help too, we might be able to target our messaging a little bit better. But we have had public, we've done webinars and that kind of thing to try to get out, and we get out in the community as well. So is our messaging ideal? Not even close. It's not. I'll admit that. But it is something that we really would like to do for all the reasons you mentioned. We'd rather not do the greenfield, but when a developer comes in and they put into the local planning folks and they want to put this thing in, I mean, there's not much we can do about that. But can we? And in our program announcements, we'll say we kind of would favor, you know, it's a plus. We're not going to not fund you if you're greenfield, but it's a plus if you're brownfield or former landfill or something like that. So.
Okay. I think we're going to have to move on, but thank you, Director Tong, for bringing your team here. And that was a good presentation. We're going to next move on to Kathy Magruder from the Maryland Clean Energy Center. Kathy, I see you somewhere.
I am here, Senator.
You are. Okay, Kathy. We've got Kathy Magruder, Executive Director of the Maryland Clean Energy Center. You're up next, Kathy.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you to the senators and distinguished delegates for the opportunity to talk to you today. Generally, the message here is about doing more with less. State funds are absolutely key to MCEC successfully achieving its mission. And the catalytic capital that the state invests with MCEC leverages a 12-to-1 return on investment in terms of private capital to help achieve desired outcomes. If we could go to the next slide, please. Just briefly, we want to talk about what MCEC does. We mobilize private capital And we leverage those funds to speed and scale the overall amount of investment in and deployment of clean energy projects, infrastructure, and technologies. State funds support translation of cutting edge clean tech innovation to capitalize on the knowledge economy and create jobs, leveraged with federal capital as well. State funds are also used to facilitate technical and procurement partnerships, supporting municipal and institutional partners to move clean energy and climate solutions from an idea to implementation faster. Next slide, please. This slide shows the distribution of MCEC's revenue and expenses for the fiscal year 2021. As I said before, we depend on state funds to maintain operations and achieve our mission, while we strive to generate revenue from transactions that can be reinvested in the center. Revenue from state and federal grants currently account for 64%, which is the majority of MCEC income, to fund our operations. Fee revenue from transactions and services accounted for 12% overall revenue in the same period. 85% of MCEC expenses are for personnel and contractual services to support our work and the projects and programs that we execute. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is just a chart showing the MCEC earned revenue from fees between FY 2020 and FY 2021. You can see that we have increased that amount almost fivefold between those 2 years. The fees would be for consultative services for procurement and technical support, different from transaction fees. Let's go to the next slide. MCEC's found that predictable funding ensures bankability and stability. With the public funds invested to date, MCEC has been able to leverage a 12-to-1 return on private capital spend on deployment of clean energy solutions. This is against a $10.3 million investment of federal, state, and local dollars over the period of time since its inception in 2009. Our work helps institutions, states, and local partners do more faster with technical support. We're currently working with Morgan State University on a master energy and sustainability plan and implementation strategies. We're also working with Baltimore City Public Schools on an energy performance contract and procurement. We partnered with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources to help win a $250,000 federal grant to support the state wood energy team. And we are excited to announce that we are the recipient of a $750,000 U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration Build to Scale grant to support our efforts at innovation advancement in the state. You asked about impacts. Let's go to the next slide. We track our impacts in a number of ways. In addition to the volume of capital that MCEC leverages, we measure the number of job hours, metric tons of carbon avoided, energy and water conserved as a result of the investments in programs and projects MCEC touches. You know, I'm not going to run through each of these individual bullets, but I wanted you to see that we look both at the energy saved and the cost reduction available to our partners as a result of those conservation measures. If we could go to the next slide. This chart shows the amount of funding collected over the course of a fiscal year in energy program spending from both the RGGI and the Empower surcharge that the state collects. Suffice to say that Maryland collects on average $300 million in funds that it uses to fund climate and energy program investments. Only 1.5 million of the total amount has been dedicated to the Maryland Energy Innovation Investment Fund, and of that amount, only 900,000 to the Maryland Clean Energy Center over the course of those past 5 years. Let's go to the next slide. I wanted you to see by this slide the cumulative total of investment in MCEC since its inception and where those funds came from to support our activity. As you can see, the largest amount is in state grants and federal grants. There was a period of time where MCEC was operated using loans that were made to the state. Those loans were forgiven in 2017 with the passage of Senate Bill 313. the point that I want you to see with this slide is that MCEC has not ever had an investment in a leveraging fund or a dedicated capital investment that continues to support its work and its ability to do public-private partnerships. If we could go to the next slide. I know Mr. Shiflett shared with you the breakdown of the RGGI formula for distribution. I'm just showing you that again. We would like to suggest that the state reconsider this distribution to do more with less, with a certain percentage invested in a catalytic capital fund in the future. This fund would be designed to enable green bank leverage of greater amounts of private capital investments in solutions and technologies designed to affect climate change impacts. As we see from MEA, the concern that the RGGI funds are not as abundantly available as they have been in the past, I think it's more important than ever to look at how the state can maximize the impact of those funds that are spent. In closing, I want to thank you for your consideration of this topic. Next slide. And I'm happy to be available to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Any questions for Ms. Magruder from the Clean Energy Center? I would note that we had some legislation in the committee that we passed that would have directed dollars to the Clean Energy Center. The governor vetoed, so I don't know. In any event, just put that out there. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you again, Kathy, for coming in today. We're going to next go to Kim Coble, Executive Director of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee and representatives from the House of Delegates. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm the Executive Director for the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and just for true transparency, I also co-chair the Maryland Commission on Climate Change and the Mitigation Work Group of the Commission. I am not representing them here today, but I did want to be transparent about that role I play. I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. You've heard a lot about this program, and I won't go through details about that. I did want to start by thanking MEA for their dedication in hard work in administering and advancing the program. I did submit written testimony, but my remarks today, I want to focus on some top line recommendations regarding the fund and how to move forward. And specifically, we come at this from an angle of wanting to ensure that the distribution of these funds are consistent with and support the goals and policies that are in our clean energy and climate programs. Our first recommendation is, and our overarching recommendation is, that the state needs to reevaluate and ensure that the distribution formula that's applied to the SEEF funds aligns with policy priorities and goals of the state. And Mr. Shiflett remarked that this formula is set by the Maryland General Assembly, and therefore we recommend that the evaluation and reprioritization process be conducted by a diverse and broad group of stakeholders through an independent legislative study committee. We think it's time that that formula be reevaluated and possibly reassessed. Our second recommendation pertains to some of the distribution of these funds. Just transportation is the leading source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And in the next 10 years, buildings are projected to become the second leading source of emissions. So we believe that the SEEF should prioritize investments in vehicle and building electrification initiatives. The state's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, the plan calls for the rapid adoption of electric vehicles and electric heat pumps that run on clean electricity. So we need to have incentives that we can provide to help Marylanders transition to electric vehicles and support the infrastructure that that's needed for electric vehicles. The SEEF fund should also be used to accelerate the adoption of zero-emission school buses, transit buses, and trucks. This is one of the most expedited ways to get greenhouse gas reductions in Maryland. Additionally, the SEEF fund should be used to accelerate heat pump retrofits statewide. The Climate Commission's mitigation work group recently approved a building energy transition plan that has not been approved by the commission, but is being recommended by the mitigation work group, that includes a recommendation for nearly all space and water heater sales to be heat pumps by 2030. And lastly, the SEEF fund should be used immediately to install heat pumps, space and water heaters in all homes and businesses that are fueled by oil and propane, which are the dirtiest and most expensive sources of energy that we have out there. So there are some recommendations specifically to vehicle and building electrification initiatives. Our third recommendation is, and it's based on a very deep, sincere belief that we need to continue with the rate relief programs for LMI communities. We are not talking about changing that. In fact, what we're talking about is augmenting the goals in that program. So we recommend that funds to help LMI communities should be maintained. They should be maintained with an emphasis on implementing energy efficiency and renewable energy, which is not done. So when we offer rate relief, we can be offering rate relief for very dirty, expensive fuels. We believe we can prioritize clean energy and bill assistance to LMI communities. Specifically, we want to maintain the funding for LMI bill assistance, but as RGGI funds increase, if they increase, especially with Pennsylvania coming on board, there's a redirection of those additional funds in the realm of 40% that would go that goes to the low income folks, and it would be recalculated so it could be divided between energy efficiency and renewable energies for these LMI communities. So anything additional on RGGI would get redistributed to making sure energy efficiency and renewable energy sources are made available for them. And secondly, we believe that following up on initiatives that are being proposed at the federal level, that what's called a Justice 40 approach be applied, where at least 40% of the climate mitigation fund should be directed to disadvantaged communities. Our fourth recommendation, I'd like to follow on Kathy Magruder's recommendation, is that pertains to our green banks. And we believe that at least 5% of RGGI funds should be given to these green banks, such as the MCEC or Montgomery County Green Bank, or Lynn Heller, who's representing the Climate Access Fund, which is a green bank for, and she'll describe that. But these green banks leverage more money. Kathy mentioned that it's a 12-to-1 ratio. So they can bring in private capital, and we can have a 10 to 12 fold increase in funds that are invested. So why aren't we giving more of these funds to these green banks? So our recommendation is that a minimum of 5% would be done. Lastly, SEEF funds should be prohibited from supporting fossil fuel projects, including fuel switching from oil or propane to natural gas. Rather, SEEF should support fuel switching from oil, propane, and natural gas to energy efficient electric equipment. In FY20, there was a $4 million investment of SEEF funds that went to programs to assist that promoted natural gas distribution. We are taking steps backward. We're trying to advance our energy goals, and here we're using these funds to move backwards in that. So obviously counterproductive to the ultimate goal for Maryland. So in closing, we do recommend that a legislative study committee is needed to reevaluate and ensure the distribution formula is consistent with our state policy priorities and goals for this, across the state. And I thank you for the chance to present to the committee.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Coble. Any questions for our witness from the League of Conservation Voters of Maryland? Okay, seeing none, I think we're going to move on to our next witness, which is Josh Tolkien from the Sierra Club. Josh, there you are. You're unmuted.
Thank you very much.
And then just for the committee, after Josh, we just have one additional witness. Mr. Tolkien, Your
Thank
turn.
you. Vice Chair Feldman, members of the committee. I'm Josh Tolkien, Director of the Maryland Chapter of the Sierra Club. Thank you for the chance to testify today. Just to establish a little bit of my history, I've been working on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and CEEF, or the predecessor to CEEF, since 2005. Helped to advocate for the Healthy Air Act, which directed then Governor Bob Ehrlich to join RGGI. The history of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund is a history of the General Assembly making clear what its goals and strategies were, and I think it's entirely appropriate and built into the fabric of this law for the General Assembly to play a role in reviewing and considering appropriate updates to the programmatic goals. We believe that the Strategic Energy Investment Fund has been one of the most effective tools to drive energy efficiency and conservation efforts. There's a lot of really great innovative programs that you heard about today targeting various parts of our economy, different opportunities and needs, and we applaud those. There's been good reporting on total energy use reduction resulting from these programs. However, if you review the CEEF annual report, what you won't find is clear information on the net greenhouse gas reductions from each of these programs. Additionally, you won't find information on demographics of who has been receiving or benefiting from these different programs. We believe that a review of the CEEF goals and steps to increase transparency, reporting, and progress towards more clear metrics would benefit the program. So we have 5 recommendations in that category. First, we believe that the program statute should be designed to specifically focus and center equity. That should be defined in what the General Assembly believes that should include: demographic, geographic. We believe a specific focus should be made on environmental justice communities that have been harmed by the history of fossil fuel use, as that is the actual source of the majority of the funds coming in. I'd reference Justice 40. This is a program of the Biden administration. It's a overarching principle that 40% of all the benefits of relevant federal programs would benefit disadvantaged communities, and requires that you track the performance towards that goal. So in my organization, we always say, if it's not written down, it's not a goal. So we believe that if there is a goal about equitable distribution and of these benefits, that should be codified. The type of dashboard that Delegate Charkoudian was mentioning earlier is a great example. Right now, there are excellent mapping programs that allow us to overlay who benefits from various programs. It would be great to be able to see in a map quickly how this overlays with historically disadvantaged communities, income level, census data, to help us understand. This is one of the largest financial programs that is targeting our energy efficiency and clean energy and climate strategies. It's really critical to have hard data on how this is being used. Change the slide, please. Secondly, explicitly orient around our climate goals. It should be codified that CEEF is, amongst other things, a tool to help Maryland achieve its Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act goals. Those are concrete goals. You have spent a lot of time developing those. And when a CEEF annual report is generated, it should explicitly talk about how the various programs have helped Maryland reach both the goals of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act as well as the strategies laid out. That type of synergy between different climate and energy related programs is pretty critical. In a sense, CEEF might have some specific strategies, but it should not have its own completely independent goals. It should be understood as a tool or a vehicle to achieve the goals the General Assembly has set. Further, I think that will help prevent some what I call misalignment. Right now, the Maryland Commission on Climate Change is going to recommend and probably approve a recommendation that we need to move all of our homes and businesses off of using fossil fuels for hot water and space heating. And at the same time, we still have a program that actually incentivizes people to move into and purchase new fossil fuel based boilers and heaters, when we know that the recommendation is to begin to move towards heat pumps. So this is just one example of where the program may not be wrong, but it is outdated, and it's important that we actually orient all of these programs towards our climate goals. Next slide, please. Number 3, we need to expand the advisory committee. This is an enormous chunk of money. The advisory committee is fairly small, just compare it to any of our standard advisory committees. This is particularly important if we want to improve the communication that Director Tung was mentioning earlier. Communication is challenging with disadvantaged communities. There might be language barriers, there are trust barriers. Having an advisory committee will mean that community partners are not just grantees. They're actually advisors that can help shape more effective programs, whether they're grant programs or being run by MEA itself. Next slide, please. Broadly speaking, we need to reorient around individual low-income customers. And what we recommend is a comprehensive health, safety, and climate retrofit program. Right now, we have programs that offer low-income energy assistance on your bill, low-income weatherization on your home, support for lead paint remediation, support for mold issues, rental assistance. Often we have those at the city level and the state level. Most of them have separate applications, separate people communicating. It is a highly inefficient system, especially when one considers that at the core of it, what we're talking about is older, often unhealthy housing. Given that trust and communication are some of the big barriers, orienting the program around the individual and how we can have a one-stop shop or one intervention point where a credible communicator can actually present all of these programs together in a more effective way would be key. Additionally, we should be identifying all of the places where we can take the application process out. Is it possible for us to just simply include the low-income rate adjustment programs automatically on bill, as some states do? We would further encourage the committee to look at programs which simply cap the total amount of income that a particular household might put towards their electricity bill. These types of programs often cost close to the same amount that our energy assistance programs do, but create a lot more predictability for families. And I would flag that I believe Delegate Sharkoudian has a bill introduced last year that would be looking at how to align some of these low-income energy efficiency programs comprehensively. That's the end of my slides, but I did want to make one last point. We think it's really important for the General Assembly to actively explore all related funding sources. Right now, Maryland puts 50% of its RGGI proceeds towards low-income energy assistance. It is not a particularly diversified funding source. Many other states fund their low-income energy assistance programs through a combination of RGGI funds and other programs. For the sustainability of this program, it would be good to look at how to diversify the funding for the low-income energy assistance. And then I would second the recommendation by Kim Coble earlier that it's really strategic for us to look at low-income energy use comprehensively. If we're looking on a 10-year timeline, the possibility of a significant upfront investment in low-income energy efficiency could save the state significant money 10 years from now that it would otherwise be spending on low-income energy assistance if we actually figure out how to target some of the older, less efficient buildings and provide affordable retrofit assistance. I'll just conclude by saying that we are really excited for this conversation. We believe that it is very much in the authority and responsibility of the General Assembly to set these types of goals. It's actually in the original legislation that it requires MEA to report on recommendations for changes for the allocation of RGGI funds every year. When they passed this program, they understood that it was going to need to evolve with time. It's been in place for more than 10 years. It was great when it was first designed, but times have changed, and it's absolutely appropriate to consider how to allow this program to evolve to meet the General Assembly's current goals. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Josh. Any questions for Mr. Tolkien? Okay, we're going to move to the final witness for today, and she was referenced earlier by Kim Coble. That is Lynn Heller. She's the CEO of the Climate Access Fund. Lynn, I do see you there, and you're unmuted. So you will be playing cleanup today for the Senate Finance Committee and the House Economic Matters Committee. Okay, so the floor is yours.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Lynn Heller, and I am the CEO of the Climate Access Fund. I also serve as the chair of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, though I'm not representing Maryland LCV today. Kim Coble did that brilliantly earlier. So thank you for the opportunity to address you today about the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. The Climate Access Fund is a statewide nonprofit green bank that is dedicated to increasing low wealth communities' access to clean energy, specifically through Maryland's Community Solar Pilot Program. As a green bank, we use public and philanthropic capital to leverage private investment in community solar projects that serve low and moderate income households. CAF, the Climate Access Fund, also develops community solar projects that are located in underserved communities and that provide discounted clean energy, primarily at a 25% discount, solar job training, and asset ownership opportunities to low-income community residents. Before I provide my testimony, I want to start by saying two things in response to some of the other testimonies. First, in her testimony, Director Tung mentioned her support for rooftop solar for LMI communities. And I just want to say I'm very pleased to hear her support. I'm not surprised by it. MEA has been an avid supporter of low-income solar. Right now, the current tax structure is a huge impediment to this goal of developing low-income solar projects on rooftops. And I just wanted to let the committee know that there will be a bill introduced this year that will seek to remove that impediment. Second, I wanted to support both my colleagues, Kathy Magruder and Kim Coble, in their recommendations to increase the amount of seed funding available for green banks in Maryland. It simply makes logical sense that one would use $1 of taxpayer funding to leverage additional dollars in private capital for energy efficiency and clean energy deployment, rather than to spend that same $1 of taxpayer money without leveraging any other private capital. All of that said, I wanted to focus my testimony today on insights from the perspective of a practitioner on the ground and a recipient of SEEP funds, which I wanted to do by diving specifically into one SEEP-funded program to give you all a sense of sort of how does all this actually work on the ground. As you all know, Maryland's Community Solar Program and its LMI, low and moderate income carve-out, is a great way for LMI households to access discounted clean energy, in theory. In reality, given the current state of solar economics in Maryland, in part due to the tax structure, in part due to the value of our solar renewable energy credits, which are a topic for a different hearing, community solar projects that serve more than a handful of lower income households are only financially viable with grant support. Thankfully, MEA has recognized this and has carved out seed funding over the past several years to support LMI community solar in the form of the LMI PPA grant program. This grant program provides funding to solar developers who commit to develop projects that serve LMI customers for at least 20 years. And I want to just dive a little bit into this program because I think it offers some really useful lessons for SEEF expenditures in general, and particularly on the implementation side. While the MEA staff with whom I've worked on this program, this and other grant programs are terrific, Eric and his colleague, David Comis, I wanted to highlight 3 problems in particular with the LMI PPA grant program. First, it's too little to make a dent, given the need. To date, the LMI PPA grant program has enabled about roughly 700 low and moderate income households statewide to participate in Maryland's community solar pilot program. Again, I want to reiterate that the only reason these projects are happening is because of CEF grant money, the availability of CEF grant money because of the solar economics in Maryland. 700. There are an estimated 400 to 450,000 low-income households alone, and that's not including moderate income, who could benefit from the community solar program. So it's too little money. Second, there is no transparency at all regarding how decisions are made about whether and how much CEF or MEA grant funding will be provided for this program year to year. There's no formal process that I'm aware of for decisions to be informed by the realities on the ground. In this case, the realities of solar finance and how projects are actually financed. If there were, perhaps more grant funding would be directed towards smaller rooftop solar projects serving low and moderate income households where the economics are extremely difficult, almost prohibitively so, rather than toward the larger ground-mounted projects that really don't need the funding as much. Third, LMI PPA grant funds are currently offered only on an annual basis with only a few months public notice of availability. While I understand that there are, and Wyatt Shiflett explained this very clearly, there are challenges in budgetary planning. This lack of notice and lack of consistency makes planning for LMI community solar development extremely difficult. Even the simplest solar projects take 18 months to 2 years to develop, and a few months notice is simply not enough for solar developers who are relying on MEA grant funding or CEF funding to commit to serving LMI households at any kind of scale at all. Finally, I want to highlight a problem that's currently under review by a team of people led by MEA staff and including the Climate Access Fund. And it's been alluded to by both Maryland League of Conservation Voters and Sierra Club. But the way the EUSP program, electricity bill assistance in particular, is currently administered by DHS and the utilities, the program is utterly incompatible with LMI community solar. So what that means is that currently an EUSP recipient or energy assistance recipient with CEF dollars who signs up for community solar will not get the full benefit of both their EUSP dollars and their community solar discount, which is of course unacceptable. And I think we would all agree to that. As I said, there's a team of people working to come up with a solution to this problem, including determining whether the solution is regulatory or legislative. So I'm not going to go into detail about it, but I raise it here because I think it's emblematic of how, by and large, the CEF program seems to have treated, and again, this has been alluded to, energy assistance over here, or rate relief, 50% of CEF proceeds, as completely distinct from low-income energy efficiency and clean energy programs over here. This is a mistake. Given that energy efficiency and clean energy actually reduce the overall cost of energy for LMI households and any households, rate relief dollars would go substantially further if they would be actively incorporated with programs like LMI Community Solar rather than being incompatible with them. So in conclusion, my recommendations, again, on the implementation side, from the vantage point of a practitioner, are number one, to commit more CEF funds to LMI clean energy programs, not just energy efficiency, which is critical, but also clean energy programs like the LMI PPA grant program, particularly when used to incentivize projects located in underserved communities and on rooftops. With all the political pushback we've seen related to solar development on open land, with widespread recognition of the need for equity and environmental justice, and the current realities of solar finance, this only makes sense. Number two, to institute more transparency in the decision-making process as to how CEF funds are going to be spent proactively. Number three, to require that CEF spending commitments be made on a multi-year basis where at all possible to help with longer term development planning. And last, to ensure that CEF spending on LMI energy efficiency and clean energy programs are incorporated into CEF spending on rate relief. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you today. And I'm really happy that this hearing has happened.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Heller, for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none, that brings an end to our briefing for today. I want to, number one, the Finance Committee yesterday had a briefing on cannabis policy, today energy policy. We have very wide bandwidth in the Senate Finance Committee. I just want to thank the committee for coming 2 days in a row for many of us. Thank our guests from House Economic Matters for joining us today. And with all that said, this